Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first of Policy Exchange's fringe events for Conservative Party Conference 2017. My name is John Blake. I am the Head of Education and Social Reform at Policy Exchange, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here for this event, in which we will be considering the role and power and purpose of the English language as a tool of commerce and communication, and its importance to the British economy, both now and in the future. And we're delighted to be joined by an expert panel, whom I shall introduce as they begin speaking. And I'm confident that it'll be a very exciting and enjoyable discussion. If you have access to the Wi-Fi for the Manchester Conference Centre, please do feel free to tweet the event. All of the hashtags and our requisite Twitter names are on the board, so please feel free to share as widely as possible. And then there'll be a chance for questions and comments at the end. So to start us off, I'd like to ask Sarah Cooper, who is the Chief Executive of English UK, and is there responsible for strategy, policy and management, and previously was at South Thames College, where she was Dean of Management and Professional Studies for International English. To start us off, to explain a little about this topic and the importance of it to us. Sarah.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much, Policy Exchange. I represent the accredited English language teaching sector in the UK, and it's at the heart of the UK's total international education offer. We have just under 450 members, all accredited by the British Council, all over the UK. And before I talk about the impact and power of English language teaching, I'd like to talk a little bit about the industry and give you a flavour of some of the students that are in our centres. Last year, nearly 500,000 people of all ages, from all over the world, for all sorts of reasons, came to the UK to study English. Half of them were under 18. And let me give you some examples of those. Imagine for an Italian teenager coming for a 2-week stay with her school. She's joined by a young Chinese boy. His family have sent him for an intensive summer course for total immersion, for the cultural experience, although he's hoping he'll see Manchester United, obviously. They do come for that total immersion in English culture. They stay with British families. They go home with a very positive impression of the UK. Many of them, especially the long haul, come back. They come back to our universities because their families have been shopping around since their children were at nursery around the globe for the best university education. So that 2-week summer camp can be the beginning of a very long-term investment. The other half are adults. They're usually here more and more for intensive, specialist, employment-related studies. They're lawyers, pilots, English is the language of the air after all, marketing directors, HR directors. They're in global companies and they may come for a week or a few weeks. All of these learners, whether they're 14 or they're adult, come here to build their confidence, careers and connections, which last a lifetime. We need to protect and grow this business. Going back to that 500,000 that came last year, of those, 242,000 of all ages, for all reasons, came from the EU. And we need to protect that business in particular. We have a history of hundreds of years of mutual cultural exchange within Europe. And I don't want us to jeopardise that relationship by having a burdensome visa regime on European Union language students, who, after all, come for an average 5-week stay. English is the most widely spoken language in the world. It's estimated there'll be 2 billion speakers by 2020 by the British Council. In many nations, a key measure of employability is competency in English. Another is experience of studying overseas. In the Middle East and North African region, English is seen as the language of intercultural communication. We know it's the language of international business. People aren't studying it to speak English with English people. French will be speaking to Korean, to Nigerian, and so on. So we need to protect and grow this business to sustain that soft power. I'd like to now finally talk about the economic impact of the English language teaching industry. English UK, as the representative body, commissioned an economic impact report 2 years ago, and at that time the industry was contributing 1.2 billion to UK GDP through the schools, through the families, and through the money that's being spent in communities. It supports over 26,000 jobs, and most of them are small businesses. We have many bigger chains, such as Chris will be talking about what EF do in this country in a moment, and we have universities and colleges, but the bulk are small businesses. We've been losing market share to the US, to Australia, to Canada, New Zealand, and Ireland latterly. English as a medium of instruction is growing, transnational education is growing, and that's all wonderful. But English is the world's language. We want people to be coming here to learn it in its mother country. So we need to protect and grow this business, which is at the heart of the international education industry. The world's language deserves more policy attention, and I would like to see some coordinated government and cross-sector strategic thinking to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'd like to turn to Lord Maude. I should say at this point that Lord Maude will have to leave us before the end of the event. So just to say, please don't take his exit as an instruction for you all to depart. We have plenty more on the programme after that. Lord Maude was Minister of State for Trade and Investment from 2015 to 2016. That followed on from an extensive career as a Conservative Member of Parliament in the House of Commons and then in the House of Lords. Lord Maude?
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me. And just really a few quick fire points to make here. First, a word about the post-Brexit world that Britain will have to compete in. I took no part in the referendum campaign. I thought both sides were making wildly inflated claims, and I thought the arguments finely balanced, with some certain short-term economic disadvantage if we voted to leave, but with some potential long-term upside opportunity. And of course, the upside opportunity is only opportunity, and it is only potential. It depends what we do. And for us to exploit that opportunity and realise it, we have to maximise Britain's competitive advantage in an increasingly open world, despite the protectionist pressures that there are. And those advantages are pretty obvious. Location and time zone, a very central position in the world for that. We are already an attractive destination for investment, but we can't take that for granted, because every other country is seeking to increase its attractiveness as a destination for investment. We will need to have the right tax regime and the right regulatory regime, and we should, of course, part of taking back control is that there is more downside risk from a government screwing things up, bluntly, as well as upside opportunity from a government doing the right things. Both the cap, the upside cap and the downside cap are removed. So tax and regulation, we will need a civil service that is genuinely the best in the world. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about, despite having some of the most brilliant civil servants in the world, we have a civil service that claims that it is the best in the world, but it really isn't. It needs to be genuinely the best in the world in this new world that we're going into. And of course, the language is an advantage for us, and how do we exploit that and maximise the benefit to Britain from that? Well, as Sarah has said, it is already the international language of business and increasingly of education, and that isn't suddenly going to change. I was very struck, 6 months or so ago was the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, and I, as my Eurosceptic friends frequently remind me, was one of the signatories. My signature adorns that treaty. Norman Lamont, who was the Chancellor, said he was going to be very busy that day, and this was Francis, this is your opportunity to put your footprints on the sands of history. And so I was invited to this conference in Maastricht to commemorate the Maastricht Treaty, and I suppose the three Brits who were invited were John Major, Douglas Hurd and me, and Douglas sadly not well enough to go, John Major probably too embarrassed, and I thought it was too funny not to go. And the funny thing was that the entirety of this event was conducted in English. In the heartland of Europe, Mr. Juncker came and he gave a very long speech, mostly in English, some of it in German until it was pointed out there was no translation, and he finally had to be led away. But I thought that really struck me as an emblem of how entrenched English is as the common language, certainly of business, but increasingly of politics and education. And so it is an advantage. So how do we exploit it? Well, we have marvellous universities, and they are a great draw. A few years ago, I was in Jakarta. I had a one-to-one meeting with the then foreign minister of Indonesia, and I noticed that there was something familiar about the tie he was wearing. And his briefing, having been better than mine was, he had spotted that we had studied at the same college at university, and he had dug out his Corpus Christi College tie to wear it. And I thought as a sort of symbol of the soft power that comes with this amazing education system that we have in this country, obviously conducted in English, is enormous. Schools, I mean, British schools, independent schools, are incredibly strong around the world, and there is a growing desire for independent schools operating in English with a UK curriculum. One of the things I do in my new post-government life is I chair Brighton College's international schools, already 3 schools, two schools in the UAE and another one opening soon. And, there are huge opportunities for this as a British export. And, of course, specifically English language teaching, which Sarah has talked eloquently about. And, of course, there is a lot of that takes place in the UK, and it's beneficial that we encourage people to come here. And my own view is that it would be sensible for us to exclude, as long as we have a robust system for controlling the entrance of students into this country genuinely to study, I think it would be a beneficial thing to remove student numbers from the overall immigration numbers, because they are it is a great distorter of what's going on with immigration. And finally, English language being taught abroad. I've had a concern for a little time about the potentially distorting role of the British Council, which has a number of English language schools around the world. And we tried to do some things to separate out their kind of soft diplomacy, cultural diplomacy activities, which are properly a taxpayer-funded activity, and from their English language teaching, which is about 80% of what they do, because there is a danger of the British Council, effectively squeezing out commercial English language schools around the world to the disadvantage of the UK overall. So I think this is a massive opportunity, and I think we need to think about all the things that can threaten that, but also all the opportunities there are to exploit it and realise benefits from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Dr. Christopher McCormick, who is the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs for our host for this evening, Education First. Christopher has had an extensive career in international education and exchange, and a source of much envy in our discussion earlier amongst the PX staff was that you've travelled to over 100 countries and Antarctica, so far, which is extremely impressive. I think I've managed, about 4. So please share with us the benefit of the wisdom you have gained from those journeys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the chair and to the panel and also to Policy Exchange for this opportunity today. We're very grateful to be able to provide some perspective from being a provider of English language training here in the United Kingdom. We're very proud of our contribution that we can make to the economy and to communities and to families here in the United Kingdom. We are currently running 9 permanent centers and several summer centers around the United Kingdom. So as a provider, we're bringing in, let's say, over the last 5 years, over a couple 100,000 students or more. So we have a very high volume of students that are coming to experience education in the United Kingdom. When people come to study here, they're looking for a range of experiences. As Sarah mentioned, there's everything from a profile of the young high school student who will have a life-changing summer. There are the executives coming for very targeted language instruction. As providers of education, we run very broad courses that reach a range of these needs. We're working with teacher development as well. We shouldn't forget that there's a lot of capacity development that needs to happen around the world to help lift the level of English in countries worldwide where it is an economic necessity to have English skills. Teachers are coming here, methodology specialists are coming here to learn, but it's also a fantastic export, taking the knowledge of English language teaching abroad. But we run courses year-round in all of our centers. They meet all of the accreditation requirements and then some, because we're always looking at ways to push innovation. How do you teach an executive the kind of language they need to lead across borders? How do you teach young people to prepare themselves for university and career, which goes beyond academic knowledge of the language? We see an incredible demand around the world and urgency to develop not only language skills, but to go beyond that, to develop what we think of as cultural fluency. What are the soft skills you need to be able to work in a multinational team, to work across borders? And what's quite interesting is actually the experience of coming to study the language in the United Kingdom, being in a multinational classroom, is incredible exposure and training for working in a multinational team. On a busy summer day, in any one of our language centers here in the United Kingdom, we'll have over 100 nationalities in the building. So every student is sitting with quite possibly 12 or 13 other nationalities in their classroom, working together to achieve objectives. So the experience that people have here is life-changing. We advocate very strongly for the benefits of learning a language. It goes beyond career opportunity, and it goes beyond academic success. There are cognitive benefits to learning a language that last a lifetime. It can help you with academic performance, but it also helps with cultural understanding and cultural awareness and being really able to seize opportunities and make connections with people. So when students live with a family here, it's not only the student who's changed. That student will go home and be a positive advocate for their experience here. And in fact, with your anecdote about the tie, it's currently estimated that 1 out of 7 world leaders have had an educational experience in the United Kingdom. So if you think about the impact, the soft power, the relationships that you can create, it begins with that 2-week summer course as a youth. So I mentioned that the person who studies here has changed, but it changes families, it changes communities. There's a great impact to be had commercially for the local businesses, for the families that welcome the students into their home. Our 9 centers, for an example, last year generated about £30 million as a contribution to the local economy through salaries, facilities, activities, and so forth. The students themselves generated another 20 million or 21 million or so on top of that. And that's just in 9 centers and 9 communities in major locations around the United Kingdom. So there's a fantastic contribution to be made, both from a personal development level as well as from an economic level. But we also have a global perspective on this. EF has been operating here in the United Kingdom since 1965, bringing our first groups of Scandinavian teachers to learn English here on the seacoast in the empty schools during the summer. But over time, we've grown the network and the opportunities that we offer. There's 500 schools and offices that we run around the world, and we have a presence in 117 countries today. And we see what people are looking for. We see why they choose to come to the United Kingdom, but we see why they also choose to go elsewhere. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we have to think about the impact of not only policies when we talk about what kind of environment are we creating here. How conducive is it to come to the United Kingdom? How welcome are these students, these executives, these professionals, these teachers? But it's not only the policies, it's the perspectives. because the perspectives can have really far-reaching consequences. If people believe that the environment's not conducive, they will choose to go elsewhere. And we do see the market share of the United Kingdom falling. Students are getting younger and younger that come here, and they're staying for shorter and shorter durations. And this is something that can and will have a lasting impact. The more that we can advocate for the benefits of learning a language, for the contribution that it can make to the economy, and for the UK's global engagement, the better we are all, a better position we will all be in to recognize that this is a life-changing experience, not only for that individual, but also for all of us. So we're glad to have this opportunity to raise awareness around this and participate in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. We turn now to David Willetts, who is currently the Executive Chair of the Resolution Foundation, but before that was Member of Parliament for Havant from 1992 up until 2015, and in which time he was also the Minister for Universities and Science. So I think.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you, and congratulations for Policy Exchange for taking this subject as the first event for the fringe events of Policy Exchange, because it really is very important. If we look at how Britain is going to pay its way in the world in the future, it's clear that education services, paying for the English language is absolutely the kind of thing we should be doing. And it is, I was in China earlier this week, and it's striking how hungry they are for English education in every form. And it's already the case that our second biggest export to China, second only to motor cars, is education. That's what they want to buy. And so it's absolutely crucial that we have an export strategy that reflects these strengths. I completely agree with Francis. We shouldn't be focused on counting students as migrants when they aren't there. We should be going out and trying to attract as many as possible. So I support the subject. And of course, there is a clear link between teaching English and other forms of English education. Indeed, implicit in the deal in coming to England to study is being taught in English and kind of learning English as part of the process. That's why actually one of the growing competitive challenges we face is more and more universities and other colleges across Europe and elsewhere that themselves now function in English. You can go to Copenhagen and do a course at the excellent Copenhagen University Business School, completely conducted in English. And indeed, in China, I met people who had done precisely that. They'd improved their English, gone to learn English, and done it in Denmark. So we shouldn't take it for granted that they're going to come here if they want to learn and speak in English. Let me, however, comment on what I think are three challenges. First, it was interesting how the focus was on attracting people here. And obviously we get a particular economic bonus when people come here and spend money here. However, I think the real missed opportunity at the moment is British education delivered abroad, yielding profits and revenues and advantages for us in the UK. And Francis was quite rightly frank, looking back on some of his ministerial battles. I have to say, one of my ministerial battles was getting the DFE to think of schools as an export. There is a powerful narrative in the DFE, which is that the English education system is in such a mess that we can't afford the luxury of looking at anything abroad. So it's very hard when you look at the obvious things we could do to capture some of the benefits of being an English school abroad or an English college or university abroad. There should be, obviously fully paying the costs, an absolutely open offer. Ofsted will come and inspect an English school abroad. We will charge full cost, probably charge full cost plus, but then you will be part of the family of Ofsted inspected English schools. There should be much greater willingness to count teacher training programs abroad in Ofsted educated schools as contributing to your teacher training qualification in the UK. We should never have got rid of IGCSE, which was a crucial qualification in the Hong Kong market, just because it didn't meet the domestic priorities of the DFE. We have, in other words, to think of our school and college and university system as an international system and promote it on that basis, not just think of it as what happens within these islands. I would say, secondly, and this is I appreciate our hosts, but actually our hosts are a very powerful emblem of what I'm talking about. There are increasingly global commercial educational chains that deliver education around the world to scale. And they reckon that if the world is hungry for education, of course some of it is going to be done by public sector bodies and through public agencies, but nothing beats ultimately harnessing the power, the management capabilities and the capital resources of a commercial enterprise. With the partial exception of Pearson's, none of these global chains are British. Despite everything we've been saying for the first half hour about how fantastic we are and how everybody wants to learn English and how it's English schools, when you look at the chains that really are generating the profits, they're Indian, they're American, they're Chinese, they're not British. And our excellent hosts are, I understand, a Swiss-headquartered company founded in Switzerland, and it's founded in Sweden. Now, it's great. We're an open economy. I welcome having them here. But it is quite paradoxical, isn't it, that one of the leading commercial enterprises capturing the value of teaching education ultimately belongs to a family resident in Switzerland. Why have we proved incapable of creating British global educational chains? We've got the classic problem. We're a cottage industry with a couple of people run a couple of little colleges and whatever. We're not organised on large-scale commercial basis, and we need to be. I can still remember the guy from Goldman Sachs coming to see me to say, if I could create a commercial enterprise exporting higher education from Britain, he would put $1 billion into the company. It was a manifest open opportunity. And part of the reason for the liberalisation of higher education, which I was involved in and Joe has taken further, was I wanted to see just one British university announcing that they were converting into a private limited company. They were going to float shares on the stock exchange, and their aim would be to run a chain of higher education institutions around the world. Instead, with an enormous amount of effort, one or two of our universities finally set up a kind of small-scale campus somewhere else. So currently, Britain is not going to get the full commercial advantage of this enormous appetite for English education. It's going to be commercial chains run out of other countries that there is no evidence as yet of any British company operating on the scale required really to seize this opportunity. So we need a scale-up strategy, just as we do in so many areas of technology. And my third comment is that we mustn't fall into the trap of thinking the whole world speaks English. It doesn't. If we are to rise to the challenge of exporting internationally, we will find quite soon, after you've finished having the conversations at head office and with the diplomats and with the senior managers, that if we really want to understand the overseas cultures in which we're dealing, if we really want to start making contracts with SMEs in many of these companies, we're going to have to learn some foreign languages ourselves. Brazil, take Brazil as an example. The level of knowledge of English in Brazil is really very modest. Now, of course, it means there's a fantastic opportunity for us to sell English to the Brazilian market, and incidentally, it's a very good example of the point Francis rightly made about being sure there's proper commercial provision and not just the British Council. But equally, I tell you, if we really want to get into the Brazilian market, some Brits need to learn Portuguese. And one of the many issues, as Francis says, if we go for Brexit, we've got to rise to the challenge, and I hope we do. I personally think Brexit is an incredibly high-risk strategy. But anyway, if we are going to rise to the challenge, why have we heard virtually nothing since we voted for Brexit on a transformation of our willingness to speak foreign languages if we're really going to aim for this grand international global strategy that we wish to see? And my experience, incidentally, of negotiating with these countries and negotiating with them to use their scholarship schemes to send their students to the UK, because, of course, all these advantages in English language you've heard about. My experience was you got much further if you turned up and say it's a two-way process. And I will extend something which we don't do at the moment, but we should do. Imagine extending student loans so that British students had a student loan entitlement if they went and studied in an overseas country, and having a trade deal where we said, great that you're going to send your scholarship students to Britain, and in return, we will say that a British student who comes to study at one of your universities will bring his or her loan with them to help finance their study. It has to be two-way. It has to be two-way financially. It has to involve a commitment by us to learn a foreign language. So there's still a lot more to be done. We share the vision. The DFE needs to be active in promoting school-level education as an international export. We need to do far better than we have at the moment of creating large-scale enterprises where currently there aren't really any that are British-based. And finally, we need to accept we still need to learn those foreign languages ourselves. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David, for that challenging outline. As somebody who spent 10 years as a teacher, I think the idea of exporting Ofsted is one that will be greeted by teachers with somewhere between possible glee that somebody else will suffer. I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating ideas nonetheless. Thank you very much. Well, we now have some time for questions from the audience. Can I ask the people, do keep them as short questions, so there needs to be a question mark at the end of your sentence, and if you're still talking when everyone else has left, it's not short. Gentleman there, and we'll take them in batches of 3 if you can. Gentleman there, lady there, and then gentleman here.
I'm Eric from Broxtowe in Nottingham, and Lord Willetts well said about the University of Nottingham, who's actually done well in China. Very, very good benchmark for future development of that industry. I'd like to talk to Sarah, who came in looking, I'm not sure if you came looking for... ask if you were looking for help with maintaining your market share rather than understanding what the market is, and have you learnt anything from what's been said so far?
Thank you. Lady there. Okay.
Susie Webb, Richmond Park. I've read recently in the press that when Brexit takes place, the European Union are talking about reviewing the situation where English is the official language of the Union and are considering, heaven forfend, French might be the substitute. Now, how do we think that's Brexit, the language, is going to affect our global position after Brexit?
Thank you. And this gentleman here. With this one.
Thanks. My name's Russell Holland. You mentioned about opportunities for higher education. Now we've got multi-academy trusts with companies. Do you see any opportunities for secondary education since 1992? Further education colleges have been effectively operating like companies. Do you see any opportunities for secondary or further education, the type of model that you've outlined?
Okay, thank you very much. Sarah, can we start with you?
Yes, I wanted to give you all a flavour of what the industry is like, simply because I didn't want to assume that you knew what it was like. I'd like to pick up on something that was mentioned, I think, by Chris, about perception. Yes, the UK has been losing market share. One of the reasons it's been losing market share is the whole rhetoric, I believe, the rhetoric around students being in the net migration targets, because that has created a perception that has driven some source destinations to other markets. And we hear that from agents. 75% of the business coming to one of my centres is through an agent, and those agents have been put off the UK by a lot of the negative rhetoric about students in net migration. Now, the vast majority of my students are not in those figures because they're not on visas or they're on short-term study visas, so they're not counted because they're here for less than a year. But it has snowballed to an extent that other countries have been able to take advantage of it. So I am worried about market share. I'm also delighted that the business has been recovering after 3 years of decline, but it is all down to this negative perception.
I would also just add that with the uncertainty, there's also opportunities. That with the dropping pound, we've actually had a bump in enrollments coming in from overseas. So that's something that was a little bit unexpected. But we do see when currencies change, people that does drive their decision making as well. It's also interesting to note the patterns. So the sending countries of students coming here have traditionally been the large markets such as Italy and France, Spain, and so forth. Those are all declining. And where they're really coming from right now is Saudi Arabia and China. Those are the only two sending countries that are really experiencing a surge in growth. And China expected to keep on growing well into the future.
Dave?
Yeah. First of all, that's a very important final point. We should be having under no illusions. At the moment, our system is very heavily dependent on Chinese students. And it is becoming more and more so. The effect of the attacks on criticism and arguments about overseas students, particularly bad in India. So English higher education would be in a considerable mess if Chinese students did not arrive. I think we've reached the point where the income from Chinese students exceeds the entire grant income from UK government agencies. So we are now essentially dependent on Chinese students for the viability of our higher education system. Secondly, on the question about English, yes, I rather agree with the point. I thought where Francis clearly thought there'd been two completely unconnected processes. One had been that English had become the dominant language in the European Union. The second had been that Britain had been a member of the European Union and could now happily leave it. I think they were slightly connected. So who knows what will happen after we leave? And I think that now English is in such a powerful position, it probably will be very hard for them to escape. But yeah, that we have to accept. There will be consequences from leaving, and one will indeed be that the native English-speaking group will be significantly smaller, and I suspect there will be an attempt to shift to the world as it was before we joined and before we really had maximum influence. Yeah, but we decided to leave. On the third point, about FE and all that, sorry, your gentleman's question. Yeah, I think this is very interesting and very important because without piling too many criticisms on the poor old Home Office, the Home Office picture is there's two legitimate reasons for coming to Britain. No, three legitimate reasons for coming to Britain to study. One is for a very short term to learn English. A few weeks, a few months perhaps. Secondly, to go to an English private boarding school, which they completely understand and are pro. The third is to come to university. They do not regard other forms of education, other types of education delivery as a legitimate reason for coming to the UK. So when you hear, for example, proud boasts, we closed all those bogus colleges, while some of them were indeed bogus colleges, others were colleges that delivered vocational training. We closed several colleges that had won the Queen's Award for exports because they're doing so well on vocational training. The Home Office model now is vocational training is not a reason for coming to the UK. So you will not get a visa to come and go and study at an FE college or to get a vocational qualification. They say, why on earth should someone need to come to Britain to do it? So one way we can lower the migration statistics is just essentially banning that form of trade. This is how they work. The reality is that one of the problems if you're good at a vocational subject in one of these developing countries is getting a qualification that signals internationally that you are good at it. So you can be very good at computer programming at an Indian college, and what you'll get is that Indian college's name on a diploma which says you've just done very well at computer programming. That has no tradable value in the global labour market. In fact, it's unlikely even to have a tradable value in the big Indian cities. If you say, I've got a city and guilds in computer programming, that is a tradable value. That means that vocational qualifications actually, and we have got several crucial brands, BTECs, city and guilds, but that means there is an enormous international market for these vocational qualifications. However, the Home Office won't let you come to Britain to study them. And the DFE view was that FE colleges were so weak that there was no reason. I remember Michael getting incredibly cross with a trade mission that took FE college principals to India. He said FE colleges should be looking after the situation in the UK. There's no justification for their wasting their time going to India. So we had a DFE that didn't want them to go, and a Home Office so the DFE wouldn't allow them to set up abroad, and the Home Office wouldn't allow the students to come to the UK. So we are currently essentially not yielding any benefits from the fact we have globally recognised vocational qualifications. It's another missed opportunity, but it requires a change in attitude in two government departments.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the panel? So, gentleman standing right at the back.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Richard Pears and I run a company called British Football School. I'm also a party member, a general activist, and I'd like to ask the panel what experience they have and what knowledge they have about cultural and community events, not just the language, but community events that the embassies and other organisations from across the world have been supporting and can be promoting in the future. We've done a small number of community events, sports related, and we found they've been a tremendous success. So I'd like to ask from what community events, not just the language, you have knowledge of and how they can be supported in the future, please.
Thank you very much. gentleman here.
Hi, good evening. Anthony Schatz, Finchley and Golders Green. Just specifically for Lord Willetts, I was interested to hear your comments about expansion of further and higher education overseas. I suppose I've got an observation and a question. I think my observation is that I've done some work in this space in my profession, and I think one of the challenges, for instance, for a university to expand overseas is that I'm not sure it's got necessarily, I don't think our universities necessarily have the skill set to actually work out how to create a business overseas. And I think in part the solution to that is partnering with the private sector, and in particular private equity. I think there's a lot of appetite for that. The question specifically is how would they fund it? And I'm not sure whether at the moment a university, for instance, could raise bonds on the debt capital markets exclusively or substantively to expand overseas. So the question specifically is, should universities and other further and higher educations be enabled to do that by government?
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, this lady here. If you just wait for the microphone. Just go ahead.
I'm Patricia Seabright from St Albans. It's following on from that question, really. I've had some involvement in this as well with clients. Universities like Cambridge University do have, obviously, an international education, Cambridge English language, etc. So they are working in a commercial way, the commercial part of a university. So I'm just interested to hear from the panel what they feel. So universities do have these commercial arms, and they're obviously not working quite as well as we would like, and certainly as the panel feel they're working. Interested to know what they think needs to change in that respect.
Chris, if we start with you.
Well, it's an interesting point to talk about what people are doing overseas and different types of qualifications, because I think the market for international exams is fairly enormous. There are millions of exams being taken for purposes of immigration, for university entrance, and for employment, whether that's IELTS, which has part ownership by UK entities, as well as the Cambridge English series of exams. It's the exam itself may be the thing that somebody hears about when they are 8 years old, looking to take one of the children's exams because their parents are putting them into a private language program, or it may be something that they've heard about throughout their high school or university career. Those exams imply the standard of the language, and this is the export opportunity, because we are looking at a framework of language. This is the source of that language. This is where the source of those standards and the source of the methodology that the teachers are working towards. So when we are running teacher training programs around the world, they are looking for UK-inspired frameworks for curricula, as well as the exams that certify them. So fantastic opportunities there. I did just want to touch on the point about community events. For the operators, members of English UK, we all depend on community involvement to make successful language courses happen. We involve families, we involve local businesses. Our own schools run an EF community program so that we can identify local partners that we can enrich the experience, whether it's through sports, through drama, through adventure, hiking, exploration, also internships and volunteering. So there's different ways that we really try to reach out, because that is what makes the difference and why people come to somewhere like the UK rather than studying only at home.
Okay, David and then Sam.
Yes, on the first one, I completely agree about the importance of sport, the international interest in sport. Indeed, on one of the trade missions I went on, led by the PM, we had Richard Scudamore, who runs the Premier League, as one of the other members of the mission. And the main reason he was there was to harness Asian interest in English football to also market English education and English language services. And there were indeed, some people had designed specific educational programs for learning English as a foreign language, which began with interest in sport. So you're absolutely right. And I'm sure there's more we can do, but the old UK tower is pursuing it. Then secondly, on the case of whether universities can operate abroad. I mean, Nottingham Ningbo is an excellent campus. And Nottingham are probably the most successful. They've got campuses in both Malaysia and in China as well, of course, as the campus here. It's taken them an enormous amount of time and effort to get to that point. And the Ningbo commercial model, and I think it's the same in Malaysia, the Ningbo commercial model is they have a Chinese commercial partner that owns most, if not all, of the campus and delivers and provides the accommodation and everything. And essentially, Nottingham University charges a fee for the provision of education services, which enables them to extract some revenues from Nottingham Ningbo. Perfectly valid model. Now, how much further, but this goes back to my point about big international businesses, how much further could you go? It is indeed absolutely the case that universities as independent entities can issue bonds and raise funding that way, and they do so, and there's a stream of people willing to lend to them. And you could issue a bond secured on the university to operate abroad. However, if I were a trustee of a British university, when the excited Vice-Chancellor comes to me and says, let's borrow 300 million to finance a chain of some universities, I would think, hang on, what exactly am I doing on this with regard, I'm the trustee of a non-profit making institution. And there is one picture of British universities, which is the trusteeship model. We are the custodians of this institution, which has normally got a place name in its title, and our job is to pass it on to the next generation, if anything, in slightly better shape than we found it. That is a completely legitimate university model. There is a different picture of university, which is to say the world is hungry for higher education. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there who are desperate for higher education. The only way to meet that demand is to harness the full power of modern capitalism, to have a company that can raise capital commercially, employ managers, and operate globally. Trying to expect a trustee model institution to take the level of risk and financial exposure necessary to become a global player is, I think, asking rather a lot. That's why my view is that you need to create institutions that are limited companies without ultimately a liability of the trustee entity to make it fully viable. You can, now, at this point, I leave it to the lawyers how separate it is, but it should be a separate entity. You can't ask the trustees of an English-named identified university to get too much into the global market on that kind of level of financing. So as I say, paradoxically, I think the problem is not the market is willing to lend. The question is, what can you ask the university to do? And then, yeah, I mean, Cambridge and Oxford are fantastic international brands, and they're a model, actually, of what a proper export strategy looks like. The way they capture value is in other ways. Cambridge captures value through Cambridge Assessment. Oxford captures value through OUP. Those are brilliant ways of saying we are an overall integrated educational enterprise. There are lots of other ways you can capture value. I remember going on one trade mission where the biggest single education export we got to Indonesia was a very smart software product that enabled them to run the school and college timetables because they're complicated things, and someone had designed a product that worked in the complicated British environment and was selling it internationally. You find that there are a whole host of products that emerge from it, and we can learn from the success of Oxford and Cambridge. You're right. So.
I'd just like to pick up on the community point. The model for most of the centres that we have, much as Chris described, is by living with British families. They are living in the heart of community. There are two examples that spring to mind. One with a school in Devon that takes teenagers year-round. They have a programme with local secondary schools where children from the secondary school come into the English language school and vice versa, and they do buddying, and that introduces the children in the British school to gives them a taste of what an exchange might be like, and that's working very well. The other is involvement in local music. One of our schools in Chester, for example, were very proud last year that one of their Polish students was the one playing the last post at the Remembrance Day service in Chester Cathedral.
Right, we've got time for one more round of questions. Lady here.
Just going to the other extreme from David. Now, I'm not talking about the hundreds of thousands of students or the millions of pounds, but more towards the cottage industry end. I have friends, secondary school teacher as I was, who do have are involved with a European paid-for scheme of having these students, European students, in their home in the summer. And they fear and anticipate and expect that will dry up now.
is there a move afoot to do a cottage industry house by house thing with students from other countries with whom we might be having commerce? As you say, David, not the top level commerce, but you're going to have to speak the language as you get further down the practitioner ladder. And it works. It's cottage industry, but it works. It will be replaced by nothing.
Thank you. Gentleman next to you.
Thank you. It's following on from Lord Willetts' point about English proficiency in, for example, Brazil being so much lower than we're used to. We've been quite used to in the last 30, 40 years to dealing with Europe, where English proficiency is so much higher. And we've almost business has always got used to having a marketplace where we can go to a country and there's going to be a local workforce that can speak the language and that knows English, and we've almost probably internalised that and not really thought about that. With the point about kind of post-Brexit, looking for international trade deals in Korea, Japan, etc., these countries where English proficiency is so much lower, do you think there should be a place for government to actually be targeting these countries in terms of exporting the English language, or is it to... Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have two more questions over here, so if you're both very brief, you can have both of them. We'll go for 4. Thank you.
You may not like my question, but I just wondered whether the reduction in export of English language teaching from this country is anything to do with the poor quality of written and spoken English by the local population.
Controversy, gentleman there.
Warwick Life, I work for Policy Exchange, and it actually links in with the discussion about market share and very neatly with that question. And I wondered, I'm very mindful of George Steiner's famous lecture in the 1970s where he talked about the way English evolved and diverged. And with the differences in India, Australia and North America, are there potentially any disadvantages of actually coming to do your English in an English or British environment when you are going to be working for a multinational company or an international organisation, and maybe it would be better perhaps to consider the Danish option?
Thank you very much. So we've all got about a minute to answer that, so I'm fairly straightforward, I would have thought. If we start with Sarah.
I'd just like to pick up on cottage industry, because I think sadly that's become a bit of a pejorative term, but it's exactly those sort of businesses that I'm concerned about too, which is why I made the point at the beginning, because they are small, often family-owned businesses. They're very good little businesses, and the families who depend on that income from homestay really depend on that income. So I am very keen to protect and grow, as I said.
Thank you, Sarah. Chris?
I'd like to follow up on the point about levels of proficiency around the world and beyond Western Europe, because we track English proficiency in the working population through tests that we run year on year. And we publish an annual index called the English Proficiency Index, ranking countries in the English proficiency in the working population. And we know that in Western Europe it's much, much higher, and this is what we're used to. Yeah. But once, there is English penetration throughout the world, but the levels are far lower, where countries such as Japan and South Korea are in sort of the somewhat middle proficiency, but we are really experiencing countries in the low proficiency categories like China, where we're going to have to really promote further education in English, really help raise standards. It's about starting with the teachers and building capacity in those countries to help them. But we have a great opportunity there because there's already the affinity, there's already the relationship, and there's already a base of English in those countries. And sadly, to your point, I grew up in Texas, so I have no business commenting on uses or abuses of the English language.
Sarah wants to come in again. I'm going to get told off for my chairing here.
Final point about targeting countries with lower levels of proficiency. The Department of International Trade is working very effectively, actually, with the whole sector, with the ELT sector, the vocational sector and the universities, about targeting countries and identifying priority markets. And there's quite a lot of very good, what I call collaborative competition building.
Brevity.
One quick comment then. On this whole cottage industry, global business narrative, of course, the cottage industry, the human contact, the individual exchange visit. I went to Germany on the exchange visit when I was doing my German A-level. All that creates human contacts and is incredibly valuable. But I am indeed, I plead guilty, I'm looking at scale. And when you look at scale, I think if you take the world's tertiary education institutions with more than 100,000 students, I think the only British one is the Open University. There are several large chains with more than 1 million students. And that helps tackle this issue. Warwick's question, well, maybe they should be studying in Copenhagen. The global chains, you can move around, and they operate in many different countries. And they'll operate predominantly in English, but not exclusively in English. And you can do a course where you do a year in England and a year in Switzerland and a year in Mumbai, and you can do a Latin American bit. They are integrated global higher education institutions. And it just so happens none of them are British. And that's what is the frustrating thing, and you can sense my frustration. I spent 4 years trying to move the system forward to create at least one of them. But so there's Manipal, there's a range of them. Manipal is actually not for profit, but there is not a British international chain, and it would be great if there were, and it would certainly be able to operate in Copenhagen as well as the UK.
Well, thank you very much. If you are if you are genuinely concerned about the quality of written and spoken English of students in the UK currently, please do join us for the Policy Exchange event on Tuesday, in which Nick Gibb will be discussing through testing times a review of educational reform project and its future in this room. And we will have, I'm told, the same cheese board. So if you've enjoyed that today, you can come back for that.
Not exactly the same.
We're not exactly the same. Cheese is better over a long period of time. And indeed, we have a wide variety of policy change events over the next few days, which you will find in this flyer on your chair. On your chair also is a bag from Education First, who, as I say, are our kind sponsor for this evening, and who I would like to thank enormously for allowing us to have this chance to have this, I think, important and vital discussion. I'd like to thank all of our panel members, who I think have given us an enormous amount of food for thought. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Do enjoy the rest of the conference, and do come back to Policy Exchange's events. Thank you very much.